I didn't realize I was doing this for a long time. I genuinely thought I was just being adaptive, maybe even mature. I could walk into almost any situation and figure out how to show up without much effort. I knew when to speak and when to stay quiet. I knew how to sound confident without trying too hard. I knew how to keep things moving so nothing felt awkward or heavy. From the outside, it probably looked like I was comfortable, like I belonged wherever I was. And in some ways, that was true. I wasn't anxious, I wasn't overwhelmed, I wasn't struggling to keep up. I was functioning well. What I didn't notice back then was how little attention I was paying to myself while all of this was happening. My awareness was almost always pointed outward, toward the room, toward the people in it, toward the tone of the conversation and the direction it was going. I was tuned into what was needed, what would work, what would fit the moment. And because I was good at that, because it made things smoother, I never stopped to question it. It didn't feel like a performance at that time. It felt like awareness, like social intelligence, like being responsible and composed. I told myself this was just what it meant to be an adult, to be capable, to be someone who could handle themselves. And maybe that's why it went unnoticed for so long. Nothing was obviously wrong. There was no clear problem to fix. People responded well to me. Situations flowed. I got through things without friction. So why would I stop and look closer? But quietly, something else was happening. I was always slightly ahead of myself, always oriented toward what was coming next. Even in moments that were supposed to be neutral or empty, there was a sense of readiness in my body. Like I was on standby, not tense exactly, just never fully settled. I wasn't disconnected, I was engaged, but I was engaged in a very specific way. My system had learned to stay alert to the outside world, and over time, that became normal, automatic. I didn't choose it anymore, it just happened. And the strange part is that this way of being was rewarded. It looked like competence, it looked like confidence, it looked like stability. So there was no external reason to pause and ask what it was costing me internally. I stayed composed, I stayed functional, I stayed available, and for a long time, I thought that meant I was doing well. What helped me notice this wasn't a big breakdown or a dramatic moment, it was smaller than that. Ordinary moments, the kind you usually don't think twice about, like walking into a meeting and immediately feeling myself sharpen, sitting a little straighter, becoming more precise with my words, not because I was nervous, but because my system already knew how to prepare. Or talking to someone senior and feeling a subtle shift in how carefully I chose my sentences, how little space I left between thoughts. Again, not fear, just adjustment. Even casual conversations had this quality. I'd be talking to a friend, and halfway through the interaction, I'd realize I was tracking their reactions more than my own experience, noticing when they leaned in, when they nodded, when something landed. I was present, but my presence was directed outward like a radar that never turned off. At the time, I would have said this was a strength, and in many ways, it was. It made me reliable, it made me easy to be around, it made me someone who could read the room and respond appropriately. People trusted that I'd handle things well. But then there were the quieter moments, the ones where nothing was required of me. Sitting alone after a long day, lying in bed before sleep, standing in the shower with no conversation to manage and no role to step into. That's where something felt slightly off. My mind wouldn't settle. It would drift toward replaying conversations, anticipating future ones, refining how I might say something differently next time. Even rest had a performative edge to it, like I was preparing myself rather than actually resting. I remember moments where I'd pick up my phone without really wanting to use it. Not because I was bored, but because being fully alone with myself felt oddly undefined. As if without something external to respond to, there was no clear posture to take internally. That was confusing because I wasn't unhappy. I wasn't struggling in any obvious way. Life was moving forward. I was doing what needed to be done. So I didn't interpret this restlessness as a signal. I just assumed this was how things were. Looking back, I can see that my system had learned something very specific. Connection happens outside, stability comes from engagement. Stillness isn't a place you stay, it's something you pass through briefly before the next interaction. So even when I was alone, part of me stayed oriented toward the outside world, toward the next task, the next conversation, the next moment where I'd need to show up as someone. There were times when people would tell me I seemed calm, grounded, confident, and I'd believe them because that's how it looked. But what they were responding to wasn't inner ease, it was consistency, predictability, the fact that I didn't fall apart under pressure. And again, that's not a bad thing, but it wasn't the same as being at home by myself. One example that stands out is how different I felt depending on who I was with. Around certain people, I felt clear and solid. Around others, I felt slightly compressed, like I was holding myself more tightly. Not dramatically, just enough to notice if I paid attention. At the time, I explained this by saying some environments were more aligned with me than others. Some people brought out different sides of me. That explanation made sense and it wasn't wrong, but it didn't go far enough. What was actually happening was that my sense of self was highly responsive. It took shape in relation to what was around it, which meant that when the environment changed, my internal experience changed with it. That's when I started noticing something subtle but important. Confidence wasn't stable. Presence wasn't consistent. They fluctuated depending on context, and instead of questioning that, I had learned to manage it, to compensate, to adapt faster. If I felt slightly off in a room, I'd become more articulate. If I felt uncertain, I'd prepare more. If I sensed distance, I'd engage more thoughtfully. Again, all of this worked, but it also meant I was always doing something to regulate myself externally rather than noticing what was happening internally. There's a moment I remember very clearly. I had finished something demanding, something that required focus and composure. When it was over, I expected to feel relief. Instead, there was this strange drop, like the structure holding me up had disappeared and nothing replaced it. I didn't know what to do with myself in that moment, not in a dramatic way, just a quiet sense of emptiness, followed quickly by the urge to fill it, to check something, to plan something, to move on to the next thing. That was one of the first times I paused and thought, this is interesting. Why is it easier for me to hold myself together under pressure than it is to simply be with myself when nothing is happening? Slowly, I began to see that I had learned how to organize myself around demands, expectations, and interactions. But I hadn't learned how to stay with myself when those things weren't present. It wasn't that I didn't have an inner world, I did. I just didn't spend much time there without a reason. My attention had been trained to move outward, and it did so efficiently. Once I noticed this, I started seeing it everywhere, in how quickly I'd prepare a response instead of sitting with a question, in how often I'd frame my thoughts as if someone else were listening even when no one was, in how rare it was for me to simply notice how I felt without immediately contextualizing it. There was always a subtle translation happening, turning experience into something usable, something shareable, something functional. And again, this wasn't conscious, it wasn't manipulative, it was just how my system had learned to operate. The realization didn't come with panic or regret, it came with a kind of quiet curiosity, like finally noticing a background noise that had always been there. I started asking myself small questions, not to fix anything, but just to observe. What happens if I don't prepare? What happens if I don't adjust? What happens if I don't immediately try to make sense of what I'm feeling? At first, the answer was discomfort, a mild one but noticeable, a sense of groundlessness, like standing without leaning on anything. And that's when it became clear that this wasn't about confidence or discipline or productivity, it was about relationships. My relationship with myself had been shaped almost entirely in response to the outside world. I knew how to be effective, I knew how to be composed, but I was still learning how to be present without performing a role, even a subtle one. And that's where things really started to shift. Once I saw this pattern, I didn't try to undo it. I didn't tell myself to stop adjusting or to suddenly become more authentic. That would have just been another performance layered on top of the old one. Instead, I started paying attention to the moments where there was nothing to respond to. Moments like sitting quietly after finishing something and noticing the urge to reach for stimulation, or being alone and feeling a slight restlessness without immediately labeling it as boredom or anxiety. I wasn't trying to change these moments, I was just staying with them a little longer than usual. At first, it felt unfamiliar. Not uncomfortable in a dramatic way, just undefined, like there was no script, no role to step into, no clear sense of who I was supposed to be in that space. And that was the point. I began to notice how often my sense of self came online in response to something external, a conversation, a task, an expectation. Without those, things felt quieter, less structured, and my system didn't quite know what to do with that silence. There were times when I'd catch myself mentally explaining my own experience as if I were narrating it for someone else. Even alone, there was a subtle audience, not a real one, but an imagined presence that shaped how I related to myself. Seeing that was humbling. Not in a shameful way, more like realizing how long I'd been living slightly forward of myself, always oriented toward what came next instead of what was here. As I stayed with this awareness, something shifted gradually. I stopped rushing to feel empty moments. I stopped immediately translating feelings into thoughts. I let sensations rise and fall without needing to understand them right away. Nothing dramatic happened. There was no sudden peace, but there was more space, more room to feel without reacting, more moments where I didn't need to be anyone in particular. And that's when I started to understand the difference between presence and performance. Performance has a direction. It's always moving toward something, toward impact, response, outcome. Presence doesn't go anywhere, it stays even when nothing is happening, especially then. The more I allowed myself to be undefined in those quiet moments, the less I needed to perform in louder ones. I didn't have to remind myself to be confident or grounded. Those qualities started showing up on their own, without effort. I noticed that my voice didn't change as much from room to room, that my posture didn't adjust as sharply, that I wasn't tracking reactions as closely. Not because I stopped caring, but because I wasn't using the environment to regulate myself anymore. There was a steadiness that wasn't tied to context, a sense of being with myself that didn't depend on who else was present. I still adapt, I still respond, I still engage. But it's no longer coming from the same place. It's not a constant calibration, it's a choice. And maybe that's the most important distinction. When adaptation comes from awareness, it doesn't cost you yourself. When it comes from habit, it slowly replaces you. What I've learned is that many of us don't struggle because we lack confidence or discipline. We struggle because we learned how to function before we learned how to feel, how to respond before we learned how to rest, how to perform before we learned how to be with ourselves. And this doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means something worked for a long time, but there comes a point where functioning well isn't enough anymore, where you start wanting a relationship with yourself that doesn't require constant adjustment. For me, that shift didn't come from doing more, it came from allowing less. Less narration, less preparation, less shaping of experience into something presentable, just being where I was, without turning it into anything. And that's still unfolding. It's not a destination, it's a practice of noticing when I'm slipping into performance and gently returning to myself without judgment. If any of this feels familiar, you don't need to change anything right away. Just notice where your attention goes when nothing is demanded of you. Notice how quickly you reach outward. Notice how rarely you simply stay. That noticing alone starts to bring you back. And slowly, without effort, the performance softens. What's left isn't a better version of you, it's just you. Before this ends, take this with you. I work with people like you, people who feel there's something deeper in them but don't want noise, hype, or motivation. They want clarity, they want alignment, they want a direction that actually makes sense. What I do is simple and deliberate. I help you bring awareness and control to your inner world so the outcomes you create outside stop feeling random and start feeling predictable. This is the Pranjal Jain, waiting for you to meet your alpha self. Stay consistent. Keep upgrading your internal world. If direction needs adjustment, adjust it with awareness, but keep your grip on the destination. Your alpha self is already waiting for you. Step up now.